I stole my twin's life, and I don't want it. A story by an average Devon. A link to the original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. I am a twin. My brother Jamie and I were born minutes apart. I was the first out. That was something I never let my brother forget. Like I imagine most twins probably are, we were inseparable. Not only that, we were the true definition of identical, from our looks to our voices. Even our attitudes were almost exactly the same. Even our own parents had troubles telling us apart. The only precise way to tell us apart was the birthmark I have on my left shoulder. It almost resembles a butterfly. Throughout school, Jamie and I never left each other's side. We were somewhat popular among our class, but we only really needed each other. Our bond seemed unbreakable. That was until we reached college. Jamie wanted to be a doctor, but I had no interest in that career path whatsoever. In fact, I had no clue what I wanted to do at all. I picked business because it seemed easy enough. As Jamie began taking more difficult classes and eventually a full-time internship, we began to see each other less and less. Despite his busy schedule, he even managed to find a girlfriend, Melissa. I had basically lost the one person I'd always been able to rely on. After a while, Jamie even got his own place with Melissa, and I was truly alone. I fell into the wrong crowd. I ended up dropping out of college after a few years. My grades hadn't been that great anyway. I just felt like I was wasting my time. Soon enough, though, I found myself working a minimum wage job and living in the slums. My brother, on the other hand, ended up becoming a pediatrician. He eventually ended up marrying Melissa. Even though I was envious, I attended the ceremony. The part that hurt me the most was that I wasn't even asked to be the best man. Maybe I was a loser, but did the bond we once had mean nothing? After the wedding, I went into an even worse downward spiral than I was already on. Not only did I become an alcoholic, I also began sampling every drug known to man. Looking back, I undoubtedly deserved what happened next. It was the middle of the night when I got the phone call. It was my dealer. He promised me something extra special if I got over to his place ASAP. The problem was, I had already had my fair share that night, but I couldn't resist the urge. I got in my car and began to head to his place. I didn't even see the semi-truck as it crumpled my car as if it was a mere toy. I'm sure I died on impact. At least, I hope I did. I don't remember if it was painful. All I remember was the light. It sounds corny, since everyone talks about the light at the end of the tunnel, but it was real. I felt myself drifting into it, and I was even able to accept that I was dead. Just before I reached it, however, I was pulled back. Something ripped me from the approaching light, and then the world was filled with darkness. I shot up in bed, covered in sweat. I was alive? Had it been a dream? "Are you okay, honey? Is something wrong?" a voice said beside me. I turned to see who the voice was. It was Melissa, my brother's wife. Why would she be in my bed? This wasn't right. What's going on? Why are you here? I questioned her. Oh, you must have had a night terror. It's okay. You're awake now, Jamie. Jamie? Why did she just call me Jamie? Was I missing something here? I turned to look at the birthmark on my shoulder, or rather, looked at where it should have been. There was nothing there. I immediately shot out of bed and went to the nearby bathroom. I looked in the mirror. I wasn't looking at a dopehead dropout. I was looking at my brother. Except, I was in control of his motions. This clearly wasn't my house either. It was far too nice. Even the bathroom's probably more valuable than the dump I lived in. Before I could even begin to question what had happened, I heard something. It was a phone from the bedroom. As if, on instincts, I went and answered it. Hello, I answered. Hello, is this Jamie Smith? The voice answered on the other end. Yes? Who is this? I'm Officer Towns. I'm sorry to inform you, but we believe your brother Seth was in an accident. We'd like you to come down to the hospital to identify the body. So I was dead. I wasn't sure exactly what was happening. But the real me was dead. Somehow, when I died, I was placed in my brother's body. Did that mean he took my place? Was Jamie dead? I hung up the phone after agreeing to come identify the body. My body. Who was that? Is everything all right? Melissa asked. Seth is dead. That was all I could say. She didn't need to hear more, though. She understood. It was so odd seeing my own dead body. It was definitely mine, though. The birthmark was there, and the toxicology report would later show the reason I ran headfirst into my death. It was true my life was meaningless, but I didn't want to steal my brother's life. He had worked for this life. I had ruined mine. Why was I still here? Why couldn't I have just gone to whatever afterlife awaited me? I would probably just ruin this life too. I had to try, though. I couldn't let my brother's hard work just go to waste. I was given time off from work for my funeral. How could I possibly be a pediatrician, though? I hadn't gone to school for this. I barely knew the difference between a cold and the flu. Still, on the first day my brother was expected back for work, I went. Surprisingly, it went much better than I expected. It was as if my brother's experience had stayed in his body. Everything was like muscle memory. I had never done any of this before, but my body, or rather my brother's body, did it for me. Even when diagnosing the patients, the right words would simply come out of my mouth. I didn't even know half of the things I diagnosed that day. I returned to my brother's home exhausted, but somewhat satisfied that night. Melissa was waiting for me. Hey honey, I know you've been down recently, and I understand why, so I put together a surprise for you, in the basement, she said. A surprise in the basement? I hadn't been in my brother's basement yet. I can only wonder what was down there. Was he into some really weird stuff like BDSM? There was only one way to find out. I followed Melissa into the basement. Of all the things I could have guessed, they would have all been wrong. When I reached the basement, there were 5 other people already down there. They were all wearing animal masks. There was a bear, an owl, a bunny, a raccoon, and an elephant. What's going on? I asked, genuinely confused and a bit frightened. Like I said, I knew you were feeling down, so I got the gang together. I know it's a bit earlier than we usually do, but we knew you needed this. After saying this, Melissa put on a lioness mask. The man in the bear mask approached me, and he handed me a wolf mask. I was beginning to think this was some kind of furry orgy. But then he also handed me a knife. I still had no clue what was going on. But I couldn't control my movements anymore. My brother's hands put on the wolf mask, then grabbed the knife. After this, the group of masked people stepped aside. Beside them was a small cage. Inside that cage was a small girl. Her mouth was taped shut, and her arms were tied behind her back. The woman in the bunny mask approached the cage and opened it. The little girl used this moment as an attempt to escape. It was futile, though. She couldn't maintain her balance with her hands behind her back, and she found herself sliding on the floor. All I wanted to do was help this little girl escape, but my body, or my brother's body, wanted something else. I had no control over what happened next. I was a spectator as I watched my brother's body approach the girl and begin to dismember her. The others joined in after a few moments. It only took a few minutes for the remains of the girl to become completely unrecognizable. There were parts of her body spread all over the basement. After everyone was finished, Melissa turned to me. Go shower and get some sleep. We will take care of the cleanup this time as an extra gift. I know you had a long day at work. I really hope this cheered you up. And that was that. I'm once again in control, but I don't want to be. I don't want to be this body. Perhaps I've been envious of my brother before, but no more. I already tried to call the police, but this body won't let me. I'm not sure why it's even letting me write this. I guess it doesn't think that anyone will believe me. And why would they? My brother and I are so much more different than I ever knew. I did want to be closer to him, but this wasn't what I had in mind. Now, I wish I could have just stayed dead. The Sanctuary, a story written by 1717. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. My name is James. I'm writing this to try and help my nerves. I think if I get down what I saw, it will all make more sense. At least, I hope so. It all started on Monday, when I arranged to get a day off from work, and I was looking for something to do. That was when my girlfriend Kathy brought up the idea to go out to a local bird sanctuary that wasn't too far from here. Seeing as I had nothing better to do, I agreed and got some stuff together before heading out in the car with her. The car petered down the road, seats bouncing up and down as we passed rows of dead trees. It had taken us half an hour just to drive out to this place, and from what I was told by Kathy, it would be another half hour of walking once we got to the parking lot. A fact I wasn't too excited about. Finally, reaching the dirt parking lot, I pulled into one of the empty spots. Even though this place seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, the fact that the parking lot was full of other vehicles was promising enough. That meant at the very least I could chat up some of the other nature goers if there wasn't anything good to see. Don't get me wrong though. Going on this little adventure to a bird sanctuary was something I was pretty interested in. I love taking nature photos, and it seemed like a pretty good opportunity to update my portfolio when Kathy found the place online. The closer we had gotten to the place, however, and the more questions I asked, the more the place seemed less than stellar. Even with all the other vehicles, there wasn't any sign of life, besides a couple of shrill howls in the distance. God, I hate coyotes. Rough hedges and bushes were all along the trail that led to the lodge, with a few scattered and very empty birdhouses visible from the parking lot, this adding to the desolate feeling this place was giving me. "Come on, James, let's give it the benefit of a doubt," I told myself as I shouldered our packs from the car, tossing Kathy's bag to her before we set off down the trail. Now, I may have judged this place a bit too quickly after all. As we walked down the trail, I got more of an idea of what kind of setup these people were going for. There was an increasing number of birdhouses scattered among the trees all throughout the sanctuary, with what looked to be nets for the birds to land on strung up in between the occasional sets of trees. The nets were thin, almost looking like a curtain as the light breeze blew through the area. Even with the additions to the forested area, it didn't ruin the natural vibe of the place. There wasn't any kind of lampposts or other electrical lighting, at least that I could spot. I made a mental note to myself to double check that our flashlights were working when we got there, in case we came back late. The sun was already hanging low in the sky. After all, streaks of orange light silhouetting the dead branches and birdhouses that surrounded us as we walked. After about 15 minutes, I heard something strange off in the distance. I was a bit confused at first, and I'll admit, a bit creeped out. It sounded like some sort of bird call, but much deeper than I was used to hearing, and quite artificial. "What on earth is that?" I asked Kathy, eyes attempting to spot whatever was making that noise in between the trees that stretched out all around us. The question was answered with a bit of teasing from her before she explained that it was, in fact, a bird call, done by a machine that was probably up by the lodge. They had it playing every 5 minutes or so to attract more birds to the area. Duh. After that, I didn't ask any more questions until we got to the lodge, feeling pretty silly about having asked in the first place. When we arrived, there was already a group who seemed to be gearing up to go on the tour. The lodge was surprisingly small, being only a single cabin with a concrete porch where a few picnic tables sat. There were lunch kits scattered around the tables that people were standing by, as it looked like we had missed our chance to eat. Some of them waved us over as we approached the group, making small talk as we waited for the tour to start. Many of the people here were locals, a couple of tourists being the only odd ones out. After only a few moments of waiting, someone exited the lodge from the side door, green uniform marking them as a tour guide for the evening. He explained that this would be the last tour of the day and had everyone finish packing up their lunch kits as the lodge would be closed when we got back. Kathy and I followed along as the tour guide rounded us all up and set off into the sanctuary. Even with the poor timing and long walk to get here, I have to say, the pictures more than made up for it. Well, I hadn't managed to spot any birds on our way in. Whenever I got the feeling of being watched, the tour guide was quick to point out that the nearby bird was responsible, allowing me to snap a few pictures before we moved on to the next area. There were even times I got to see them resting on those curtain-like nets, making for a fantastic couple of photos. In no time at all, we found ourselves at the end of the tour. Only then I realized just how dark it was getting. Kathy was just as surprised as I was, apparently just as entranced for the guided part of the tour. We were hurried back to the lodge by the guide, who thanked us all for coming, running some of the group through the gift shop while Kathy and I talked about what we had seen. We should just have had enough daylight to make it back before it was pitch black. I say should. as Kathy and I talked just enough to cut that time down by a lot. We brought those flashlights. Before we left, I had an eerie feeling of being watched again, which was followed, sure enough, by Kathy spotting a nearby owl that sat perched on one of the branches hanging above the exit trail. Its eyes gazed in our direction, and I made sure to snap a quick picture as we left. I have to say that the bird sanctuary in the dark was much different than it was in the light. In the rays of our flashlights, all that had looked so nice and natural now seemed to conspire against us. The bird nets were almost impossible to spot alongside the trail beyond thin wisps of reflected light, and the birdhouses caused blocky shadows to stretch out across the trees as well. Worst of all had to have been that damn bird call that still went on as we slowly walked down the road, its low mechanical call echoing throughout the forest. Nearly reaching the parking lot, our journey was interrupted suddenly when we heard a splashing coming from a small pond that sat beyond a trail to our left. If it had been in the light of day, that wouldn't have been much more than a small bit of noise to draw our attention. But in the black of night, our heads went on a swivel. Slowly, I swept my flashlight's beam across the pond, only catching the ripples in the water of whatever had made that noise. Then suddenly, my eyes caught movement, light flicking back to the trail as it lit up the glistening wet fur of something small and hunched. That something was a beaver. I let out a breath that I'd been holding in, and a bit of laughter at the thing. This entire time, I hadn't really noticed that Kathy was practically using me as a human shield. Her fingers clamped tightly onto my arm as she let out a few choice swear words towards the furry creature. "Oh, come on," I said as I pried her hand off with a goofy grin. "It's not like it's some kind of axe murderer. It's just a harmless beaver." But that was the wrong answer. I couldn't get out my apology before Kathy shoved me and stormed off in the direction of the car, causing me to drop my flashlight. Looked like I was either going to have to jog back to the car to catch up, or I could take a picture of the furry trespasser and take the regular walk back so she had a chance to cool off. I thought about how I'd make it up to her as I snapped a picture, the flash of the camera finally causing the beaver to scurry off into the nearby bushes. Letting my camera drop back down around my neck, I finally started back towards the parking lot. It took a few days before I had a chance to review the pictures that I had taken, having been in the doghouse ever since, and doing a lot of chores around the house. Bringing them up, I loaded up the first picture into Photoshop. I usually don't do too much to edit my pictures, trying to keep them as natural as I can, but occasionally I'll find blemishes or things I want to tweak before I put something out. The first picture, being the most recent one, was of that beaver that managed to spook us and be the reason I now had some sucking up to do. Even though I had used flash at the time, it was more of a band-aid on the lighting issue. I started to mess with the brightness and contrast first. It wasn't until I managed to get the scene to a more neutral set of colors when I spotted something weird. When I had taken the picture, it lit up the surrounding trail and forest behind the beaver. And there, in the forest, between the trees, I swear, I could see a face. Just hidden to the side with only half of it visible. Zooming in didn't do much but confirm what I thought. It freaked me the F out. As far as I knew, there wasn't anyone who should have been that deep into the woods. And if it had been an employee, what were they doing out there so late? It wasn't like they could have seen anything of us except our flashlights, and we were leaving, just around closing too. Maybe they had been making sure we weren't getting into any trouble. But just the fact that someone had been spying on us made me pissed off. These thoughts boiled in my head as I went on to the next picture, not wanting to look at that one anymore. After just a few moments of looking at the next photo, I nearly threw myself out of my chair when I saw it again. Another face, the exact same one, except this time it was in a set of bushes. Again, far enough back that at the time of taking this photo, I wouldn't have noticed it. Hell, I think the only reason I even noticed it was because I had seen it in the last photo. This time, though, I could tell it was looking dead into the camera. I couldn't make out much of its features, but those damn eyes were more than enough. I was almost too nervous to review the other photos, but when I finally worked up the courage, I could confirm it. That same face was in every single one. Always far enough that it was hard to spot, but always clear enough to see it. Someone in that park had been watching me for the entire damn tour. This was all last night. This morning, the news reported a missing person. Someone who I recognized. A member of the tour group. Police had already combed over the sanctuary and didn't find the person at first. What they found initially sparked a redo of the area. Deeper into the sanctuary, they had come across one of those bird nets, though it seemed to have been modified. In it were the carcasses of multiple birds. Many of them looked like they have been eaten by wild animals or other scavengers. But some seemed to have marks on them of human teeth. After searching the area a second time, they found the remains of the missing person at the bottom of a pond, having been picked nearly clean. On the body, they found matching teeth marks, the same as those that had been found on the birds. Needless to say, I don't think I'll be going to the bird sanctuary again for a long time. I Don't Drive at Night Anymore, a story written by 1717. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. I don't drive at night anymore. At least, I don't drive anywhere that isn't very well illuminated. I know that sounds silly. Trust me when I say that my friends tease me to no end about it. They are the types that love going for late night cruises out around the outskirts of town and to go stargazing. Both activities I enjoyed too, once. That was until that one night. After that, I couldn't bring myself out of the light ever again. It was about a year ago, in late July. I was living in a small town at the time in northern Alberta, staying there to get the most out of the cheap community college and low rent. I had just finished my finals and was looking forward to visiting family out west for my week-long vacation. It wasn't exactly a short trip. A total of 4 hours at least just to even get to the next town over. To get to where my parents were was an additional 6 hours of travel. Driving through Alberta isn't exactly exciting either. Not unless you enjoy wide open spaces and a lot of empty fields at least. It was about 4 a.m. when I got into my car. The bright idea to leave early that I had the previous night was now leaving me bleary-eyed and full of regret. I headed over to the closest gas station and stocked up on the usual road trip supplies. Energy drinks, chips, pretty much everything that looked good at the time. The coffee I'd brought with me was starting to kick in, and I began to look forward to at least the first initial few hours of the trip. That was typically how it was with long car rides for me. The first few hours were great and relaxing, with the rest of the trip just slowly getting worse as I got those fun cramps or stiffness in the body from sitting too long. Before heading out of the city, I checked my phone, queuing up my playlist of music that would be keeping me company, and double-checking my route out of the city on Google Maps. Damn, a red bar set halfway between me and where I was heading. Construction ahead. Expected delay, 45 minutes. Great. That was just my luck that the main road itself was getting work done, but there wasn't anything I could really do about that. Finally, pulling out of the gas station, I headed out, starting my long journey. The music pulsed through the speakers as the light pollution of the city slowly faded behind me, and the night sky grew even brighter. It was a full moon out tonight, and one that complemented the sea of stars quite nicely too. That helped raise my mood up a bit, and I soon got lost in thought as I cruised down that dark road. After about an hour of driving down the open highway, the sky seemed to quickly darken, the moon becoming obscured, and the illuminated plains around me fading away to an inky black. The only thing that was visible now outside of my headlights were different twinkling lights off on the horizon, and the city lights far behind, still in my rear view mirror. The lights ahead pulsed orange and red, with the occasional flash of a vehicle's headlights. That had to have been construction, I figured. It was another joy of driving out in these flat areas. You were able to see practically a full hour ahead of you in advance, and just really take in all that excitement. At night, without the moon's glow, it was a much different feeling than boring though. It kind of felt like you were driving through space itself, a massive black expanse all around you, with only the different bits of light off in the distance showing any real signs of life, almost as though the night sky itself had dripped down and enveloped the ground below. I cursed and shielded my eyes as someone passed me with the set of far too bright to be legal headlights, night vision being lost immediately. By the time I could actually see again, thankfully having not flown off the road, everything that wasn't in my headlights was just pitch black now. The edges of my car headlight beams didn't seem to extend very far out either. Because of this, I almost missed a pair of cars that were off the side of the road, hazard lights going on and off to try and warn me in advance. I slowed my vehicle to try and get a better look, in case they needed any help. But as I passed by, I didn't see anyone in the vehicles themselves. Neither car appeared to be damaged either. Weird. Maybe the owners had car problems and had hitched a ride back to town until a tow truck could come and retrieve the vehicles. I couldn't really give much better of a guess than that, so I continued on, not wanting to rubberneck any more than I had already had. The darkness at this point had become rather oppressive. I noticed that outside of my beams of light, it was now just a solid black wall, like it just cut off immediately with no glow or anything. I had to slow my speed to half just to be safe. While trying my best to stay on the road, I must have completely forgotten about the construction zone, for when an orange pylon appeared out of the darkness, I hit the brakes. I must have missed the warning signs due to this weird blackout, but this had to have been the start of the construction zone. With due diligence, I crawled through the area trying to catch sight of any workers or really any signs of life. That was when I realized that there should have been some kind of life around here. I had already seen their lights on further back down the road, but now As I drove through, there wasn't a single piece of equipment that seemed to be turned on in any way. Excavators sat abandoned, doors wide open without an operator inside. Any floodlights had been knocked over or otherwise turned off in some other manner. However, things quickly went south from there. About halfway through was when I saw someone finally. A prone body laid down on the side of the road. Only half of the person was visible from my car. I stopped my vehicle, wondering what he was doing at first, as it looked like he had his ear to the ground. Eventually, I decided that he must have been unconscious, so I put the car in park, turning on my phone's flashlight and the car interior light before getting out to add as much extra light as I could to the area. The moment I stepped out of the car, I could feel a very stark difference in the air. It was supposed to be the middle of summer, yet I could almost see my breath. It was freezing out here for some reason. "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" I called out nervously, voice holding an odd echo to it that had no right to be there. I shined my flashlight over him as I got closer, before quickly stumbling back. Jesus Christ! I practically sprinted back to my car, throwing myself inside and slamming the door behind me. Panicking to find the lock button, my fingers hit it, and I tried to stop myself from hyperventilating. The lower half of that man's body has been eaten. Past his stomach, there was nothing more than bits of gore and viscera that had been strewn across the road. It looked like something had just ripped into him and left the rest to rot. I pulled out my phone and tried to call 911, but I had no bars. I must have been too far out to get any signal. It wasn't like I could do anything to help the poor man from here. So I pulled the car out of park and continued out of the construction site. I spotted a few more bodies in varying condition as I tried to make my way out. That was when I saw it. Just as I turned the corner, my headlights illuminated something that was hunched over another construction worker. It almost looked like a person, but it was far too dark. It was incredibly thin, spine jutting out from its back as it initially faced away. When it turned in response to the light, it covered its malformed face with a massive hand that ended in sharp, ragged claws, pinprick white eyes glaring at me from the shadows of its hand as it let out a shriek and bounded off into the darkness. At that point, I slammed my foot down on the gas and floored it out of there, having to swerve once or twice to avoid the abandoned equipment. Eventually, I rocketed out of the site, going far too fast but unable to slow down. In my rear view mirror, I could see them, a collection of white eyes that trailed along behind me in the distance. They didn't make any sound, but I could tell they were getting closer, little by little. I must have had at least some luck tonight as I made my way over the next hill. I could see off in the distance a gas station that was still lit up, a beacon of light in the sea of darkness that surrounded me. I managed to get to it in only a few minutes, my tires screeching across the pavement as I came to a halt directly under the gas area. The darkness was like a wall around it, but I had a clear path to get inside the building. Taking a deep breath, I escaped my vehicle and sprinted up to the glass door. When I got to it, the attendant inside was already unlocking it and pressing a button on the side to power it on, letting it open enough to get me in before he closed it again with the lock in place. "Are you all right?" he asked me as I stumbled away from the door, trying to put distance between me and the numerous windows that covered the front wall of the station. I felt vulnerable. There, in that little store, the panes of glass being the only thing between us and all that darkness outside, was just waiting for the lights to go out. I started to try and explain to him what I had seen, when outside the bulbs began to blow, one by one, around the top of the gas station. With the darkness encroaching closer and closer until it was pressed up against the windows. The light that was inside didn't seem to faze it at all now. Almost as soon as it had reached the glass, I could see them again, small sets of white eyes dipping in and out of the darkness. "What the hell is going on?" the attendant cried in a panic as he too backed away from the glass. That was when we saw the first crack appear on the window, the tip of a clawed hand pressing onto the glass as it singed underneath the bits of light that reached. "I don't know. Just help me barricade this," I shouted back to him before shoving the shelves towards the front of the store. The glass held long enough for us to get a sort of half wall set up, but I knew it wouldn't hold them back forever. Turning to him, I asked, "Is there a security room or somewhere else we can go to hide in here?" He nodded, saying, "In the back room. It's small, but it should fit us both." We got into the security room and shut the door, sliding the heavy lock into place before settling in. The room was small, but well illuminated. A row of 6 TVs showing different camera angles from around the building. 4 of them were completely blacked out, with only 2 left that were inside the store itself. One was positioned in the main lobby, and the second was pointed just outside our door. Only a few minutes after we had entered the security room did the front windows shatter. We only got to see a couple of seconds, but we watched the shelf get pushed aside and inside go completely black. Now all the cameras were dark, and then a single bulb above us started to flicker. I turned on my phone's flashlight just in case. Luckily, the power didn't go out in this room at least, the door being sealed along the bottom as well, so there wasn't any cracks for whatever this thing was to filter in through. We sat there in silence for a long time, neither of us brave enough to break it, in fear of attracting unwanted attention. That silence broke at the first sound of scratching, which eventually led to a chorus of low whispers just outside our door. They sounded just like normal people, and if it wasn't for what I had already seen, I might have thought that we were being rescued. But their voices were too low, and underneath their pleas for us to come out, I could get the sense of danger just on the edges of it. Like if we didn't comply, there would be consequences. I don't know how long we were forced to sit there and listen to the scratching and whispers. The TV monitors would come on, though, one by one as the darkness seemed to recede. The sky a pool of red and orange that signaled sunrise. We waited until the sun was well above the horizon before opening the door slowly and taking our first steps outside. The store was trashed, glass everywhere, along with what looked like hundreds of footprints that had trampled across the merchandise. My car appeared untouched, and I got it running again after the police arrived to aid the attendant. I still don't know what I saw that night. I don't think I ever will. But I think that's for the best, as there are some things that should probably stay in their darkness. Cats Can't Talk. A story written by the librarian chick. A link to the original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. My daughter was complaining about a cat that stared at her while she was sleeping. Sweetheart, we don't have a cat. We can't have cats because I'm allergic to them. I laughed at her imagination. Her cute little face scrunched up in frustration. But there was a cat in my room last night. It's big and black, and it sits and stares at me. Her brother, my son Justin, rolled his eyes at his younger sister as he ate his Cheerios. You just had a nightmare, Susanna. Everyone gets them. They're nothing special. He shot his sister another irritated look as he went back to eating his breakfast. But there is one. I touched it, and it had really soft fur, and it spoke to me. She stared at her brother, as if trying to make him believe her with sheer determination. I smiled at my daughter and touched her hair, smoothing it back from her face as she spoke. Sweetheart, your brother is right. You just had a nightmare, or a dream. It doesn't sound like you were really scared of it. I stepped away from her and went to make some coffee. It really was too early to be up, but the kids had to be ready for their bus. I wasn't really scared, but it was really weird, and it spoke to me. She looked from me to her brother and back again. She had a pleading look in her eye. What did the cat say? Justin asked, as he pushed his empty cereal bowl away. It just said my name. That's all. She looked defeated. It was clear to her now that neither of us believed her. If there was a talking cat, then it proves that it wasn't real, Justin said with a shrug. And he was right after all. Cats certainly didn't talk. Sometimes people have dreams where they can fly or breathe underwater. But that doesn't mean that they really can, I tried to rationalize. It wasn't the best explanation, but at the age of 8, she really should know the difference between dreams and reality. I guess, Susanna said in a dejected voice. She ate the rest of her Fruit Loops, so she couldn't have been that upset. If she was really upset, she would refuse to eat, which drove me crazy. Kissing the kids goodbye, I ushered them out the door and to the street corner where a small group of children had already gathered. I love you guys, I waved and smiled at them as I stepped away, starting to head back to the house. When Susanna took hold of my hand, thinking she might want a hug, I bent down and opened my arms to her. She ran into my arms and I gave her a big hug. There really was a cat, Mommy. She said it softly before backing away and joining the other children. I hesitated for a second before finally heading home. Susanna had as much imagination as any kid, perhaps even more active than most. When she was much younger, she even had an imaginary friend that she would swear was real. I checked her bedroom just in case. No sign of any stray cat, not even a stuffed cat. Susanna had plenty of stuffed owls and dogs, even a whale and a raccoon, but no stuffed feline that could be confused for the real thing. Plus, if there had been a cat, my allergies would have already started acting up. That night, after dinner, Susanna was uncharacteristically quiet. Usually, she would be enthusiastically telling me or her brother about her day. She would even call her dad, my ex-husband Will, on Skype, if she was particularly energetic. Her father and I were divorced, but he had remarried and moved an hour away. He was a great dad and would listen intently to his daughter as she recounted her day to him. Susanna looked lethargic, and I felt her forehead, making sure that she did not have a fever. "Sweetie, are you feeling okay?" I ran my fingers through her soft hair as she looked up at me. "I'm just tired, Mommy. I think I need some coffee," she said, with a little grin, and I couldn't help but laugh. She smiled a little and went back to watching cartoons. Justin was playing on his PlayStation. With both kids occupied, I took the opportunity to get everything ready for bed. Cleaning up the kitchen was relatively easy. We had ordered pizza and used paper plates, so there were no dishes to wash. I never knew I would be so excited about not doing dishes. But that's adult life for you. When I tucked my kids in for that night, Justin went right to sleep, but my daughter took some coaxing. She asked if I could read her a bedtime story, something she hadn't asked for a few months. I indulged her, picking a story that would take no more than 10 minutes. I still had some things to do to prepare for work tomorrow before I could go to bed myself. Even though I loved reading to her, I couldn't take too long doing it. "Can I hear one more story, Mommy?" she asked me, with her eyes already closed. "No, sweetie, you're really tired and you need to get some sleep." I kissed her on the cheek and tucked her in one last time. "Mommy," she asked, her speech already slurring with exhaustion, "what if that cat comes back tonight?" "Then you should tell him to go away," I teased before turning off the light and closing the door behind me. I finished up my prep work for tomorrow, did a little more cleaning, and then finally dragged myself to bed after a hasty shower. If I was lucky, I'd get a little over 6 hours of sleep tonight. Maybe I could sleep in when I retired. As I walked to bed, I very quietly checked on each of my kids. Justin was snoring softly, which was kinda cute, and Susanna was fast asleep with her arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed whale. The next day came too soon, and I groaned as I dragged myself to the kitchen. Everyone needed breakfast, and no amount of grumbling would help me get it done. Walking down the hallway, I knocked on each of my kids' doors. "Time for breakfast," I called out, even managing to sound cheery. Justin emerged first, bleary-eyed, and headed to the bathroom. I busied myself with making coffee and pouring out the kids' cereal. My son entered the kitchen, already dressed but yawning. He sat down and started eating his cereal with his eyes half closed. "Did you sleep well, sweetie?" I asked him as I joined him at the table. "I wish it was Saturday," he grumbled, still shoveling his cereal into his mouth. "It's Saturday tomorrow, and you guys can sleep in, and I'll make pancakes," I promised him. Pancakes were the kids' favorite breakfast food. "Where's Susanna?" Justin asked, looking over to her usual spot at the table, which was empty. I mentally cursed myself and stood up to go check on my daughter. I was hoping she was already dressed, otherwise she might not have time to eat breakfast before rushing out to the bus stop. I knocked on her door and waited. I didn't want to open the door if she was in the middle of dressing. "Susanna, honey, are you up? You're going to have to hurry if you want to eat breakfast before the bus comes." But I heard no answer from her. I opened the door and saw Susanna still under the covers, her tiny arm wrapped tight around her whale. Walking over, I gently touched her arm. Maybe she was sick? After all, she had seemed so lethargic last night. "Susanna, sweetie, you really need to." My voice trailed off as I touched her forearm. My daughter's arm was ice cold, and it was at that moment that I realized she wasn't breathing. The rush of fear and adrenaline that hit me at that moment was like a punch to the face. I didn't even realize I was screaming until Justin ran into the room, eyes wide and panicked. He looked at Susanna and screamed too, his eyes going wider. I attempted CPR, but there was no hope. She was completely stiff, like she was frozen. Justin called an ambulance, and the EMT found me in my daughter's room, still trying to breathe life back into her little body. They had to pry me away from her. I don't remember much of what happened next. It was a blur, and I think I may have fainted at one point. Calling Will and telling him what happened to our daughter was one of the hardest moments in my life, as was planning her funeral. I blamed myself. I should have done more to help my daughter. She hadn't been feeling well. Why didn't I take her to the emergency room? The autopsy had revealed her heart had failed to pump properly. Heart failure was rare at such an early age, but it was not unheard of. They tried to assure me that her death was painless and sudden enough that there would not have been any warning. I blamed myself. I think I would always blame myself. I had taken a leave of absence from work, and Justin was staying with his dad. Both of us didn't want to go back home. Not to the place where Susanna had died. While Justin could stay with his dad, I couldn't stay in hotels forever. My money would run out eventually. I had to go back to work. Even though they had been accommodating, their understanding wouldn't last forever. And someone had to do something with Susanna's room. I thought about leaving it as it was, a shrine to her almost. But that didn't seem healthy or wise. I knew my daughter well enough to know that she wouldn't have wanted that. When I walked into the house, I was struck by two things. It smelled terrible, and it was so utterly still. I almost walked back out and slept in the car because it felt so eerie. But I forced myself to stay. The garbage stank as I did the dishes that had been left out. The milk had curdled on the kitchen table, and I tossed it out with the shutter. Tomorrow was the start of the weekend, and I could still be free from work. So I stayed up until well past midnight cleaning and disinfecting my home. Even though it was a mundane and time-consuming task, it made me feel better. It was a tiny step toward normalcy. Before bed, I resolved to take a bath. I couldn't remember the last time I had one. With 2 kids, a full-time job, I rarely had the time to sit and soak in some bubbles. I walked past Susanna's room and bit back a sob. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her door. Tomorrow, I might have the strength to go inside. Maybe. The bubble bath did help relax me, and I felt exhaustion tug at me, and I knew sleep would not be far away. I toweled off and crawled into bed naked. There was no point in pajamas as I was the only one in the house. Sleep claimed me quickly, and I welcomed the temporary oblivion. I awoke again sometime in the night, gasping for breath. I was sweating, and I felt an oppressiveness in the air. It was like the oxygen had become cold and heavy at the same time. I glanced at the alarm clock, and the neon red letters told me that it was just after 3 a.m. I lay there, feeling dread creep over me. I had no idea what had awakened me, until I saw something creeping up towards my face from the end of the bed. I had not noticed it at first. It was black and blended into the darkness of the bedroom. As it crept forward, I saw what it was. It was a cat. So black that it looked like an oil slick. The moonlight that crept in from the window only illuminated it slightly, but it was enough. Its eyes weren't visible until it stopped inches from my face. They were a shining onyx, glinting at me with a kind of amused malice. No pupils were visible, and I wondered briefly if it was actually blind. My mouth opened, but no sound emerged. I was too shocked to scream, Reaching out, I touched it gently, gingerly, hoping I was hallucinating the whole thing. The fur was as soft and slick as silk. The black cat opened its mouth wide, almost like it was mocking my own silent scream. Its gums, teeth, and tongue were just as black as the rest of it, all of it leading down its pitch black gullet. And then it spoke, a whispery voice echoing up from the depths of the cat's body, though the mouth did not move. Mary. I can read minds. Someone is trying to kill me. A story written by NM Writes. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. I can read minds. In fact, right now you're thinking, you can't really read minds. Just kidding. It doesn't work like that. From the time I was a kid, I realized I was different. I could tell what people were thinking. And while you might think that would be cool, it's actually confusing. And people think you're scary. I learned pretty quickly not to talk about it. It took longer to figure out how to use it. People are thinking all of the time. If I'm within about 50 feet of them, I can hear their thoughts in my head. It was awful to get used to. My mom was the only person who knew the truth. And since she's gone, my secret is forever safe. You see, all thoughts sound the same. I don't hear them in the thinker's voice. I hear them in a weird, androgynous voice that sounds the same no matter the thinker. So without some clues, I'm stuck wondering who the thought is coming from. I spent most of my childhood with all my teachers thinking I had trouble learning, when in fact I was trying to figure out how to stop the thoughts of the other 25 kids in my class from overwhelming my brain. Anyway, I don't have many friends, and relationships are hard. You might think reading your partner's mind would be great, but trust me when I say you do not want to know everything they find annoying, unattractive, or weird about you, but are too kind to say. It's not easy. Professionally, I found a way to use my special gift. I turned myself into an above-average student by realizing I could figure out what everyone else thought the answers were on exams, and I did quite well when I could get some solitude and work on papers myself without others' thoughts intruding. I went to law school and opened a small firm with my best friend Nathan. We specialize in contract negotiations and got a great reputation for our negotiating skills. As it turns out, having someone in the room who can read the mind of the other side helps a lot. Plus, he understands my need for solitude, even if he doesn't know that it's due to me being overwhelmed by hearing the thoughts of others. He just thinks I have a sixth sense for negotiating, which in some ways, I guess I do. Sorry, I'm rambling. I'm pretty scared right now, and don't have time to get all this down. My problem started 2 weeks ago. We were in the middle of our largest negotiation ever, our merger that would really put us on the map. However, the other side has only met us in person a handful of times, so I've been of limited use and it's been stressing me out. We are getting ready for a few big sessions, and I know I need to deliver. Not surprisingly, I've been having nightmares almost every night. I was tossing and turning one night when I heard the thought, clear as day. It was enough to make me sit straight up in bed. Going to slip in and slice his throat. One of these windows must be unlocked. He needs to die. It was the voice. That means I'm hearing someone's thought. I ran to the window and looked out, but saw no one in the dark. I live alone in a remote area, kind of a necessity with my condition, and shouldn't be able to hear anyone unless they're near my house. I shook it off as probably a nightmare and still not being totally awake. The next night, it happened again. As I stood looking out into the darkness surrounding my house, I thought I saw a movement, but couldn't be sure. Either way, I was done with messing around. Someone was sneaking up to my house in the dark with thoughts of murder on their mind. I bought about 20 motion-activated lights that day and stuck them all around my house. That night, several popped on, and I heard someone curse in my head. I didn't hear anything after that. Whoever the psycho was, that took care of it. I still added an alarm system, state of the art, and started coming into work earlier and staying later, which was easy, as I was not feeling ready for the negotiation we had coming up. The day of the big negotiation came and the office was packed. I hadn't had any other issues at home, but I still hadn't been sleeping well with the stress. As I walked into the meeting, I heard one thought cut across the rest. I hate him. I looked around. It could have been any one of the 50 people in our office. Thinking about anyone, I brushed it off and went into the meeting. Negotiations were brutal. Tons of minutiae, not enough of bigger picture stuff. We went for 10 hours with only a few breaks. We cleared out to let people run to the bathroom when I finally got it. One of the partners on the other side was going through notes, and I found myself in the room alone with him. He was concerned about the total amount we were going to push for, and thought about how high they were willing to go before walking away. It was a full 15% more than we thought we would be able to get. I almost ran out the door to Nathan's office. This is the biggest they're going to go before walking away. I slid it across the desk. He stared at the number. Are you sure? If we push this high and this falls apart, we're screwed. I nodded. I know this will work. It did. That night, the whole office celebrated together. Hearing the warm thoughts of my co-workers washing through my head was an intoxicating feeling. I decided to duck out on a high note and head home. I walked into the parking lot and headed to my car. That's when I heard it, clear as day in my head. Finally, a chance to kill him. Can't believe he just wandered off by himself. I spun around looking for a masked killer. The parking lot was empty. I ran to my car. The next day, in the office, it happened again. I was in the break room when I heard someone's thought. Those damn lights are keeping me away, but I could do it here if I get a chance. No mistake this time, and it wasn't random at all. I took my computer and went home. Over the next 3 days, I considered everyone in the office. It had to be someone senior enough that my death would give them a chance at a promotion, but junior enough that they felt disrespected for some reason by me, and who had been with us long enough that they felt I was a problem that needed to be solved with my weird hours and need for solitude. I went through the names 100 times. I checked Facebook and Twitter profiles. I barely slept and had narrowed it down to 2 possible suspects. I stared at their faces trying to figure out which one of them hated me so much that they wanted to try and kill me. Nathan finally called after the 3rd day I didn't show up at or call the office, worried about me. He asked if I was eating or sleeping. Both answers were no, and I told him that someone at the office was trying to kill me. He said he'd pick up some food and we'd figure out how to catch this murderous monster. He showed up with takeout and took one look at me before telling me to take a shower, which I guess I needed. I came upstairs and started getting ready to shower when I heard it again. Can't believe he installed all this security and then just let me in the front door. I ran to my bedroom door and locked it before looking for my phone. It was downstairs on the counter where I left it. I'm writing this hoping someone reads this and can report what happened here. Nathan is knocking on my bedroom door now, asking me to come downstairs to talk to him. I can hear his thoughts, though, and how he does all the work and my weird lucky guesses gets all the credit, and how killing me will finally give him the chance to get the recognition he deserves. I don't think I have long until he gets in here. I can hear him thinking about how strong the door is, and he just remembered that there is an axe by the back door for firewood. My coworker may be a vampire. A story written by Atrocicus. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. I used to work with a guy who I swear was a vampire, and he was the reason I got a job as a cryptozoologist and monster hunter. Now, before you give me the whole vampires aren't real, how stupid could you be reaction, just let me explain why I believe this. When this happened, I was a paramedic, and I was working midnight to 8:30 a.m. for about 3 years. I came into work one night to see a stranger standing in the meeting hall, and the first thing I noticed was that his skin was as pale as freshly fallen snow, and it had a bluish glow to it. Of course, it wasn't the sparkle that everyone associates with Twilight, but it was still odd. I soon learned that he was my new co-worker, and he was nervous about his first day on the job. The second thing I noticed about him was that he didn't have a shadow. We had extremely bright fluorescent lights in the corridor, and every other employee in the hospital that passed under them cast a shadow. I shrugged it off as we gathered in the briefing room. I needed to be focused, and the weird new guy couldn't be my priority. Travis, our head paramedic, greeted us before barking out his usual orders. "Good morning, men. I hope you all got your beauty sleep in, though I could see some of you clearly didn't because tonight is going to be another busy night. There have already been 5 accident reports." I was surprised at the amount of reports that had already come through, since we normally didn't get any the half hour between midnight and 12:30 a.m. We finished debriefing, then we got our gear together and headed out in our usual teams. I took a quick mental note of who would be on my team tonight, and I was surprised to see the new guy sitting in the passenger seat of my ambulance. I walked up to the window, a friendly smile upon my face. I couldn't remember if Travis said he would be with me, but I wanted to make sure that he felt welcomed. "Hey, good morning. I noticed you're new here. Do you know if you have the right team?" An eerie, too wide smile crawled across his face as he turned to me, and I gasped. He had incredible tangerine-colored eyes, and I took a step back in shock. His voice was like gravel. It irritated something in the primal part of my subconscious. "I am with the correct team, Hunter, and my name is Callan." By that point, I was nearly wetting myself. I had always been a little on the jumpy side, but this was too... How did he have that color of eyes? How did he know my name? These thoughts were rushing through my head, but then rational thought hit me. The guy probably saw my name tag or heard someone else call me by my name. That, however, did not explain the hue of orange his eyes radiated. I faked an awkward smile, then climbed into the ambulance as far from him as I could get. 10 minutes later, we arrived to the scene of our first accident. It was out in the middle of nowhere on Dark Shade Road, which is in my hometown of Windber, Pennsylvania. In the past 3 years, I have seen some nasty accidents, like decapitation, people being thrown from the car and found dead 25 feet away, and unlucky family pets mangled from impact. But none of that compared to what I saw that night. In the driver's seat of the car sat a man, and we barely recognized him as one of the town's founding family members. Blood was spattered everywhere in the car, and the scene looked like a horror movie where a head got fried in the microwave. It took all I could muster to hold my breakfast in, and I can honestly say that was one of the hardest things I had done up to that point. Upon further inspection, it appeared he had his throat ripped out, and it didn't seem to be from impact considering the bite marks located near his jugular. The new guy looked even more freaked out than I did, but not quite in the same way. It almost appeared like he was trying to hold in the urge to eat a juicy, rare steak. As we began our cleanup, his angry expression nagged at me, and I couldn't let it go. About an hour after we arrived, the police finally showed up, and Captain Robertson repetitively apologized for being late. She explained that she had to show up to 5 other scenes, all of which were nearly identical to this one. I pulled her to the side, keeping my voice hushed as I questioned her. "Lana, this is a frickin' nightmare. What do you think could have done something like this?" Without responding, she pulled me even further away from my team, her voice coming out as an exhausted whisper. "I don't want to jump the gun, but the last time something like this happened was 50 years ago when the Gallo family came back to town." It took a moment for the name Gallo to register. Then I recalled where I'd heard it. I remember my father mentioning something like that, but what he told me was the same story all of our parents told us to keep us from sneaking out after dark. "Look, I don't know what's going on, Captain, but we've got to get to the bottom of this before there's another mass panic. This town hasn't seen a lynching in 5 decades, and I don't want to derail that record tonight." She nodded, casting a tired glance back at the accident scene. "Well, let's just hope that it's a rabid cougar or a wolf attack." After our conversation, we went back to cleaning up the scene, and I noticed the new guy looking at me as he stood a good distance away. Because of his strange behavior, I approached him to make sure he was okay, and I made an effort to sound jocular as I approached him. Not everyone responded well to death jokes, but I hoped that it might ease the tension a little. "What's the matter? Never seen a bloodbath before? I hear they do wonders for the skin." "It's not that." He had a strange tone to his voice, and it halted me in my tracks. "I think I may know what could have happened here, and I fear I am correct. I need to take care of things at home, so please inform Travis that I am sorry. I have to take the rest of the night off." "What do you mean?" "As the team head, I highly suggest that if you have any idea what may have caused this, you tell me immediately. There was 4 other animal attacks exactly like this tonight, and I am worried that this isn't the end." He paused, but then drooped his head sadly. I watched him inhale, and his next words were so quiet that I nearly missed them. "It was most likely my sister Jezebel who had a hand in this." Immediately after the response, Kellen walked back towards the ambulance, and he disappeared behind a few of the police officers. When I saw him the next night, I realized that I was angry at him for walking off the scene like that. and my words came out more chilled than I had meant for them to. What the hell was up with you last night? He just shrugged, his face expressionless as he responded. There are things in this world you would not understand. Let me take care of this, since I do not want to see any more humans in this town hurt. Humans? That one word brought up so many other questions. What did he mean by that? Was he not human? Were my ancestors right? And there were such things as monsters? Were the stories my father and grandfather told real accounts, rather than the fictional stories I had believed them to be? Was I truly the descendant of monster hunters? There's no way. I must have spoken out loud because he turned his head to face me. In barely a second, he had moved across the hall, and he was staring at me with a gloating smirk. Oh, so you finally realized that the stories your family had passed down were real? You are the slow little slug. What? How do you know that? Your family has always been close to mine, Hunter. The LaCrosse family has provided us with the necessary means to feed for hundreds of years, and we even occasionally marry one of you. Why do you think every male in your family has been a paramedic dating back to the Revolutionary War? The fact that he knew my family were paramedics all the way to the 1700s terrified me, because that wasn't even documented in any of the dank old history books rotting away in the public library. Was he a vampire? Was this why he looked so disturbed last night? Did Callan know my family better than I did? I wanted to question him more, but it was time to head out, and I didn't want Travis yelling at us for being late. Just like the night before, we came upon a grueling scene, and as we were removing the body from the car, I looked over at my weird coworker. Look, Callan, I think I know what you are, which means I probably know what your sister is. Can you explain more to me about our family's histories, or at least tell me how we can stop your sister? At this rate, she's going to take out half the town by the end of this month. Hunter, I do not know how to tell you this. My sister wants human blood, and the only way for us to stop her in this state is to kill her. I have tried feeding her what I have gotten from the hospital, but she has gone ravage. He took a shuddering breath, and even in the midst of the craziness, I felt bad for him. No amount of blood will satiate her primal hunger. Most of the others in my family are getting by well, drinking the blood I bring back from work. But she is not. Do you still have your family journal? Your father, bless his soul, was there the last time this happened. He alone was capable of taking down my brother, Milton. This is nuts. Look, just find the book and get some supplies that we will need. You are intelligent enough to figure this out. Stuff? What stuff? This doesn't make any sense. At least find some vampire repellent or you will likely die. With that, Callan disappeared into the night again, his pale silhouette vanishing behind a tree. It left me wondering what in the hell he meant about my father being there last time this happened, and about the repellent. Just how many times had this happened, and why was it never in the news? Until it hit me what the chief said about 50 years ago this happened. My family's stories were indeed fact, not fiction. My Coworker May Be a Vampire Part 2, a story written by Atrocicus. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. The next morning, I dug through my attic until I found a large chest, one that I hadn't seen in 20 years. If there was going to be an old journal describing how my father stopped Kaylin's brother, then it would be in this chest. I blew the half-inch thick layer of dust off the chest, pushing it open. As it creaked open, I saw a thick journal, which looked much older than anything else in the trunk, buried at the bottom. Upon finding the ancient-looking journal, I opened it, and as I did, a gust of wind penetrated the old attic. Finally, after exiting my spooky old attic, I decided to read the first few pages. Most of the beginning ones looked smudged due to the age. But what I could make out was that it was a warning not to read this journal unless an emergency happened. As I flipped through the journal, I noticed multiple unnerving titles and wondered to myself how this town that I had grown up in would have so many secrets. One page said words that nearly made me freeze up and not continue reading. If you have taken it upon yourself to find this journal, I fear the worst, and inside this book, you will find the solution to the problems you are facing. That was followed by an odd handwritten table of contents. Chapter 1, Lycanthropes and Lycanthropy. Section 1, Weaknesses. Section 2, Strengths. Section 3, How to Stop Them. Section 4, Accounts. Chapter 2, The Fae Courts. Unsullied and Sullied. Section 1, Weaknesses. Section 2, Strengths. Section 3, How to Stop Them. Section 4, Accounts. Chapter 3, Cryptozoology and Monsters of the World. Section 1, Weaknesses. Section 2, Strengths. Section 3, How to Stop Them. Section 4, Accounts. Chapter 4, Undead, Vampires, Ghouls, Demons. Section 1, Weaknesses. Section 2, Strengths. Section 3, How to Stop Them. Section 4, Accounts. I immediately turned to the pages listed under the Undead chapter. Vampires, thankfully, had been the first part of this section. Section 1 stated that their weaknesses did include sun and a stake to the heart, but also mentioned that vampires were not weakened by garlic. It did, however, mention a plant that weakened their powers, called hawthorn tree flowers. I had no idea where I would get any hawthorn flowers, but I made a mental note that they could help us. After a few hours of reading and trying my damnedest to memorize the information about vampires, I ended up passing out in my lazy boy recliner. The dreams I had were some of the most terrifying that I had ever had in my life. Yet, they felt prophetic. Finally, nighttime came and I got ready for work. Instead of my normal pre-work, I took an hour before I had to leave to reread the information from the journal and pack up some wooden tent stakes I had in the attic. Tonight felt much darker and colder than the past few nights, and the moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. Shadows bent around my headlights, and they almost seemed malicious. Anxiety was causing my throat to dry out, and upon walking into our normal meeting spot, I noticed most of the team hadn't shown up yet. I was relieved to see that Callan was standing against a wall close to his normal place, and I eagerly approached him. "Did you bring the stuff we need?" His tone was hushed, as if to hide his words from the rest of the team. "I have everything that we will need to put an end to your psychotic sister, except something called hawthorn flowers that I couldn't find any of." I tossed him the bag I had packed specifically for him, and we awaited the nightly briefing. Finally, about half an hour later, the boss came running down the hall looking terrified. "What's the matter, boss?" We had never seen him like this, and I was concerned. There was a monster. It was waiting for me in the parking lot. I got out of my car and saw a beautiful woman sitting on the hospital steps crying. And as I approached, she lunged towards me. Before anyone could gather their thoughts or even say anything, Callan stepped forward. What did she look like, boss? Marvelous black hair, sapphire blue eyes. That was all Callan had to hear. Then he was running down the hall towards the front door. I was confused, but I figured it was his sister outside. I barked a few instructions and then hastily followed him. Get everyone inside the office and barricade the door. Do not let anything in. I caught up with him at the front door, and he stood looking more afraid than I had imagined he could. Hey man, are you sure you can do this? If not, I can take care of your sister. Yes, I have to protect this town from her. Or rather, we have to protect this town from her, like our ancestors have done for over 3 centuries. The next few minutes seemed like a millennia, as we checked the gear I had put together and flushed out a plan. I would distract the bloodthirsty monster, and while she was occupied with me, Callan would approach her from behind and thrust the stake through her heart. We pushed the doors open as the frigid night air gave my skin a deathly cold chill. If the plan failed, I would be a big old dinner for one of the most dangerous monsters in the world, but I reassured myself that it was worth it. I clutched my weapon tightly as I walked through the double doors. With every step, my heart thumped faster, like a soldier marching to a bloodthirsty war drum. As I rounded the corner towards the side door, I caught a glimpse of something supernaturally fast pass by me. At that moment, it hit me that if Callan wasn't faster than her, I would be screwed. As I walked forward, trying my hardest to reassure myself that everything would be all right, I remembered one of my dreams. This was the exact scenario, and if everything else went the same way, I would find one of my co-workers' lifeless bodies laying on the ground next to a dumpster. I followed my gut, rounding the side of the building where the dumpster stood. There was Alex, his throat ripped open and a puddle of blood drenching his once white shirt. I was wiping away a tear when a voice spliced through the darkness. You look almost as tasty as the cowardly man I chased into this building. Those were the last words I remember before blacking out. Sometime later, I woke up in a hospital bed, an aching feeling tearing through my back and legs. What had happened? How was I alive? Was it all a dream? No, it couldn't have been. It felt so real. I tried to get up, but I heard footsteps coming down the hall so quickly, I laid back down. Good morning, my friend. I hope you have rested well. Callan stepped past the curtain, and he looked exhausted. You have been asleep for 2 days, and I hear that's a lot for a human. I have? What do you mean? I've been asleep for 2 days. What happened to your sister? We were on a job, and you ended up passing out at the sight of blood. I had never seen you act that way, and you collapsed from the sight, and now you are here, finally awake. What about your sister? Did you kill her? Calm down, Hunter. You must rest. Nurse! A nurse quickly shuffled over, and within minutes I was back in a drug-induced sleep. When I woke up, he was gone, and I still felt agitated. Was everything truly just a fear-induced dream? Upon getting home, I walked into my living room and immediately froze. There, on my coffee table, was a mound of little white flowers. They were accompanied by a simple note, and it gave me chills. To H from C. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon. This is why I believe my partner was a vampire. That's all the proof I have that Callan Gallo is not the man we all think he is. And from that day on, I told myself that I would spend my life proving to everyone that we live in a world of the unknown. I've got a stalker, but I don't think he's human. A story written by the inspector. Links to their Facebook page and Reddit will be available in the description down below. I guess I'll preface this with a quick disclaimer. I hate Valentine's Day. I'm not sure whose bright idea it is to remind bachelors like me how painfully single we are by shoving hearts and flowers and cutesy kissing couples in our faces. We've officially turned love into a commodity, something you can buy in boxes of chocolate and expensive jewelry, and it's sickening. I know I'm hardly the first person to complain about how commercial it is. It just ticks me off is all. Am I bitter? Maybe just a little. Truth is, I used to love the holiday. At least back when I had a steady boyfriend to spend my money on. Everything seems so much rosier when you've got a warm body to cuddle up with on cold nights. Someone to spoil with little love trinkets and stolen kisses. It's only when you don't have that anymore that you realize how shallow it all is. I won't name that particular ex in case he happens to be reading this. We parted on relatively good terms, and I'd rather not drag his name through the mud. Our breakup kinda soured me on romance in general, though. Besides, I was going through a big life transition, moving all the way to the East Coast to start my post-college career. And it was probably for the best that I didn't have a relationship to sidetrack me. The problem is this: being single sucks. As much as I disparage some of the commercial trappings of romance, it does get lonely when you get home from a long day at the office and there's no one there to greet you when you come in. Plus, the obvious lack of physical comforts. There's no shortage of Boston locals looking for easy hookups, and I'll admit I've gone that route myself on more than one occasion. Empty hookups are just that, empty. So, lately, my relationship with relationships has been complicated to say the least, especially now that Valentine's Day is looming, and I just know the office is going to be decked out in paper hearts and blinding shades of pink before the week is up. Sandra, who has the cubicle next to mine, is already wearing heart-shaped earrings and listening to sappy love songs while she works. $10, she's got a boyfriend to keep her warm when she gets home. Not that I'm jealous or anything. Anyway, the point is, I was already feeling kind of crappy about my love life when I got the email. The office was emptying out and I was wrapping up a last-minute spreadsheet when my inbox pinged. I was sure it was just my project coordinator or something. I clicked over to my email to skim the message. It wasn't my coordinator. In fact, it was from an address I didn't recognize at all. A string of gibberish letters at a domain ng.net. I would have deleted it as spam, but something about the subject line made me pause. Subject: Jonathan, I miss what we used to have. I knew spam bots could fill in your name to any number of phishing templates, but there was something weirdly personal about this one, and I found my finger hesitating over the mouse. I would be in deep trouble if this email flooded my work computer with viruses, but I couldn't shake this notion that my ex had sent me the message, as stupid as it sounds, and I didn't want to delete the thing, without at least taking a peek. I clicked on the email and regretted it immediately. Jonathan, I still remember watching you in the light of the purple moon. The way ashes fluttered on your breath like flecks of forgotten things, and the way your hair rested on the pillow, all rumpled and brown. I just want to run my hands through that hair again. Oh, Jonathan, I can't stop thinking about you, the way you bite your lip when you're working at your cubicle, the way your skin is flushed on cold walks through the city, the way you touch yourself in the dark when no one else is watching. How I want to touch you, just once, just one more time. I want you to feel me. I want to feel you. I want you to complete me, Jonathan. Help me feel complete. My face went red. I clicked delete so hard I thought I might break my mouse. I craned my neck to make sure no one had been reading over my shoulder. Then shut down my computer and hastily got my things to leave. Suddenly, I didn't feel so safe anymore. This wasn't spam. This hadn't been spam. It was too specific, too close to home. I didn't think it was my ex either. Someone was watching me. It might have been watching me for a while. Could it have been one of my previous hookups? Someone who had gotten a little too attached? I didn't know how else to explain the whole line about touching me just one more time, but the part about the purple moon and the ashes on my breath was so weird and unsettling that I wasn't sure what to think. I could have asked one of my coworkers to walk with me to the train station just in case, but only Barbara from accounting was still hanging around, and it probably would have been weird for a strapping young man like myself to ask for a bodyguard. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. Besides, everyone was leaving work right about now, and Boston would be packed with people on my way home. I'd be safe in the crowd. I hate how it gets dark here around 4 p.m. in winter. But at least I'm used to it. It's pretty much the same back in Washington. The sky was already turning gray when I left the office. I joined the swarm of pedestrians and headed down the street towards Haymarket. It's been freezing lately, and that day was no exception. I hunkered in my scarf and jacket and worked my way forward as quickly as the crowd would allow. I probably wouldn't have noticed the weird guy in the black hoodie if I hadn't looked up at the exact right second. I was just passing Faneuil Hall, and there was a street performer playing drums on a set of plastic buckets. I turned my head to watch him play, and that was when I locked eyes with a man standing by the Samuel Adams statue. His face was mostly hidden underneath his hood, but I could see his eyes clear as day. They were a bright, vivid purple. He was staring right at me. I couldn't tell for sure, but I thought he might have been smiling. I pushed through the crowd, apologizing profusely. When I looked back, the guy in the hood was still staring at me. He lifted a gloved hand and offered me a slight wave. I turned back around, heart thumping, praying I could just make it to the green line in one piece. Thankfully, I got there without incident. The train was packed, but I was grateful for the cover. I felt safer surrounded by so many people. We rumbled along on our way to Brighton. I couldn't help but sneak glances at my fellow passengers, hoping I wouldn't find the man in the hoodie staring back at me. I hated that I was getting so paranoid, but after that messed up email, what else was I supposed to do? The hooded man, whoever it was, didn't show his face again that day, but I couldn't shake the sense that he was still watching me somehow. That night I invited a guy over for a little fling. No one I knew, just some jock on Grindr looking for a fun time. Not exactly my proudest moment, but hey, any dude who likes dude has been there at some point. It wasn't that I was feeling especially needy. I just didn't want to be alone. My roommate was out for the weekend, and the idea of spending 2 days by myself while some creep was out there stalking me wasn't the most appealing prospect. At this point, I'd take the comfort of a stranger over that kind of isolation. The jock showed up at my apartment around 9 o'clock. He had a tiny hoop earring, a neck tattoo, and platinum blonde hair with a single streak of green. A little more out there than my usual type, but at least he was fit. We never actually exchanged names. In my head, he was a Travis. We made out for a bit, did some other things I'm totally not going to share online, and spent the rest of the night cuddling and watching Netflix. He didn't talk much, which I was grateful for. Most of the time you can tell when a brief connection isn't going to grow into something more. Travis was there, and he was gentle and fun and just the kind of distraction I needed. That was good enough for me. I invited him to stay the night, partly because I wasn't going to kick the guy out into sub-zero weather, but mostly because I wanted someone to hold while I was sleeping. Even in dreamland, I didn't want to be alone. He preferred to be the big spoon, so I nestled up against him, holding his hand as I fell asleep. I don't remember what I dreamed about that night, if I dreamed at all. All I know is I woke up in the early hours of the morning, and I wasn't holding Travis's hand anymore. Traces of gray sunlight lit up the far side of my bedroom, and there was a thick, heavy feeling in the air, like a blanket of heat without the warmth. I took a sniff, and I was instantly nauseated by the nastiest stench that had ever crossed my nostrils, something like raw meat mixed with sewage. I turned to look at Travis, but what I saw on the other side of the bed brought a scream to my throat, along with a good amount of bile. Travis had been mauled. His face was a pulpy mess, his chest cavity ripped open like a bomb had gone off inside his guts. Blood was splattered everywhere, all across the walls and bed sheets, and the crappy t-shirt I had worn to bed. There was this weird black gunk sprayed over everything too, but I couldn't tell what the substance was supposed to be. I scrambled out of bed and vomited into the corner, my whole body shaking. I had no idea who else had been in my apartment last night, or why they murdered Travis, but left me alone. All I knew was that I had to call the police. I grabbed my jeans off the floor and fumbled through the pockets for my cell phone, but when I dialed 911 and held the phone up to my ear, the only thing I heard was a deep, heavy breathing. "Who the hell is this?" I shouted. The person on the other end of the line spoke, or at least I assume it was a person. Their voice was garbled and a bit robotic, like they were speaking through a vocoder or something. It made my head throb with pain. "Oh, Jonathan, it pained me to see you with another. How terrible that made me feel, absolutely spurned and jaded. I couldn't stand to see him holding you like that, so I did what I had to do. I had to show you that he could never love me the way I love you. Oh, Jonathan, how I want you to be with me, to fill me up, to complete me." "Leave me alone," I screamed. Tears were running down my face now, and I was at the point of incoherence. "Please leave me the hell alone." "I will never stop, Jonathan. I will follow you to the ends of the earth, until at least we can be together. We can be one soul, one being, One beating heart. I hung up the phone and threw it into the corner. I curled up on the floor and clutched my knees to my chest, trying and failing not to cry. I couldn't look at the mangled mess on my bed. That used to be Travis. This was my fault. I had dragged someone totally innocent into my messed up nightmare, and now he was dead because of me. He'd probably had plans for the weekend, or a term paper to write for college, or a big lacrosse game coming up or something. I'd never ask. Now, I'd never know. Trying to call someone was obviously a bust, and I couldn't stick around here for long. The stench from Travis's corpse was threatening to make me vomit again. Besides, sticking around here when a stalker had already murdered someone in my bed was borderline suicidal. I hastily pulled off my blood-stained t-shirt and threw on some clean clothes. Then I grabbed my backpack and shoved a handful of necessities. It was early, but I could probably catch a Greyhound out of South Station if I booked it. Boston didn't feel like the safest place for me to be right now. I didn't want to leave the body for my roommate to find when he got back, but there was no chance in hell I was going to try and move it. If I could find a working phone somewhere along the way, I'd try reaching the police again. That was the extent of my advanced planning, though. I was too focused on the now, on getting the heck out of here while I still had my legs attached, to worry about what came next. When I was satisfied that I had packed everything I needed, I swung the backpack over my shoulder and booked it downstairs. Then I headed out into the frigid winter morning. The sun was just barely coming up over the tops of the apartments across the street, and everything was quiet. I could only hear the clomping of my footsteps and the rumbling of distant traffic. I kept craning my neck to look behind me. There was no one else walking the sidewalks at this hour, but my neck was prickling, and I wasn't sure if someone was actually watching me, or if I was just being paranoid. I shifted my backpack and quickened my pace. The Boston College stop was only a few blocks away, and I figured I could get there before the sun came up completely. Then I heard it. The light patter of shoes on pavement. I turned around, nervous breaths billowing from my mouth in the cold, and I saw a man in a black hoodie strolling along the sidewalk. At first I let myself believe it was just someone out for a brisk morning walk. Then the stroll turned into a stride, covering several feet with each gangly step, and I felt my heart leap in my chest. I turned around and began to run. The stranger's footsteps had changed from light patters to earth-shaking thuds, like his shoes were slamming into the pavement. I clutched at the straps of my backpack and ran as fast as I could, even when I felt cramps developing on my side, even when I clipped the edge of my jacket on a loose tangle of the fence. There was no one on the street to cry out to, no cops waiting on the corner to save me. If the train wasn't waiting for me when I arrived, then I was screwed, plain and simple. I dared one more look behind me and nearly stumbled flat on my face. The man in the hoodie, he was changing. His body was unfolding like an envelope, his face turning waxy like a dummy, his chest bursting open to reveal a grisly red and black interior. The black was the same goop I had seen in my apartment. The red was a pulsing cluster of human hearts. There must have been 20 or more stuffed into his chest cavity. They were still beating, still pumping out streams of thick red blood, and they throbbed as one when they saw me looking back. We can be together. We can be one soul, one beating heart. I shuddered, swallowed some bile, and forced myself to go a little faster. I could see the Green Line train approaching the station just up ahead. The sight sent such a surge of relief through me that I think I started laughing and sobbing at the same time. I leapt off the sidewalk, narrowly missing a passing car, and hurried onto the platform. The trolley cars were just hissing open as I ran up. I hurled inside, breathing heavily, and swiped my Charlie card across the scanner. The doors began to close. Too slow, far too slow. I ignored the stares of other passengers as I clambered to the back of the carriage and took a seat. I couldn't keep myself from glancing nervously out the window. The train lurched forward, rumbling its way along the track, leaving behind a solitary figure on the platform. He looked like a person again, just an ordinary man in a black hoodie. But I had seen the thing inside of him. Whatever was standing out there, it wasn't human. It never had been. It stared at me with those weirdly purple eyes as the train picked up speed and left it standing in the cold. I turned away from the window and tried to breathe normally again. This all happened this morning. I am writing this from the back of a Greyhound bus, huddled up in my winter jacket and keeping a watchful eye on the other passengers. I haven't seen the figure in the black hoodie since I left Boston. I haven't gotten any more threatening emails or taken any menacing calls on my phone. I'm not naive enough to believe this is over, though. I will never stop, Jonathan. I will follow you to the ends of the earth until at last we can be together. Not gonna lie, I still get chills thinking about those words, but I have to try and escape. Maybe I'm an idiot for thinking I can outrun this thing. Maybe it's always going to be at my back until it decides to show itself again. Maybe one day I'll wake up to find that hideous cavity of beating hearts opening up to consume me. Life's a ticking clock now. I don't know how long I've got left, but you damn well better believe I'm going to outlast this thing as long as I can. I can't tell you where I'm going in case he happens to read this. Just know I'm going somewhere safe, and maybe, if I'm lucky, somewhere I won't be alone.